and ask questions. That's, I mean, we could talk for 2 days on type 1, but obviously we're not going to do that. But I just wanted to see what questions. Catherine, you had a comment. Was it beyond I could screen share? You just want to tell me I could screen share? Do you want me to fix the typo in the slide? Okay, go ahead. Who else?
Can you grow into other types over your life?
That is such a good question, and I'm going to touch on it. It's going to be challenging. The answer is probably not, but your experience. So the Enneagram relies on the spirituality of direct experience. And I actually taught a class this summer where we used the parables of Jesus to display different types, but I'm not in your heart or in your head, Barbara. So it's not a thing for us to tell. I will say it can feel like your type is changing. And in a minute, when I share again, if you remember the circle, if you were here last week, type 1 touches 9 and 2. So that means type 9 and type 2 are very accessible to you. So if you're reading or the weeks I cover those, you're probably going to be like, I do that. Or, and I think at different points in our lives, different numbers that we communicate with come out more strongly or weakly. But I think that there's something maybe sacred about landing in 1. The other thing that's a little confusing for this amount of time, but do you remember I showed you there's numbers across the circle? 1, the arrows go to 4, which we haven't covered, which is the romantic idealist, very feeling, very can towards melancholy, but likes big energy around feelings. But also 1 can go to type 7, which is the epicure, who 7s just want to have fun. They're kind of the life of the party, very fast paced, don't have time for pain. So really, I think it's about balance, Barbara, and that there are times, there's a lot of talk in the Enneagram community that, not to be sexist, but I think most of us are of an age that the role of gender was pretty set, whether we wanted it or not. And women with young children will often believe they lead with type 2, which is the helper, the nurturer, the right, give, I have to give. So I think, Barbara, that's a question we can keep revisiting each week, because I think it's got a lot in it. And the goal is not to say, well, I'm a 1 and I'm a perfectionist, so when I go to this meeting, I'm just going to lead with what's wrong and I'm going to tell everybody because I'm a type 1. So there you have it. And you know, right. I mean, the goal is to move more towards the virtue for a 1 of serenity and acceptance that the world is both broken and perfect, that God is both present and at times we feel lost, that there is beauty and misery all in a wholeness of the world. And that I think as Christians, we have to admit that we're always living in the not yet, right? That we're straining to see a kingdom that is present on earth, but it certainly is not always visible every day.
So it's likely that we're a blend of types.
I definitely think, and the more you study it, the more you feel you're a blend. But I have a little funny line to tell you. I would scan in your week for your first thought. And then a friend told me that her daughter was in some counseling, and the counselor looked at the daughter and said, I want you to remember one thing, first thought wrong. And so I joke a lot in my family. So my first thought is always, what is there to be afraid of here? What's the worst thing that could happen? So that's not super helpful, and I flip around to other types, but my type leads with worst case scenario thinking. So it's good for me to see that so that I can blend. Right. So I would kind of catch yourself, and there's going to be a lot I'm going to say about catching yourself. A 1 would not lead with what's to be afraid of here. They're going to lead with what can I fix here? That's a generous, positive view of what a 1 might say. Any other questions or thoughts for people that are discerning? I think our friends that sort of knew their type from last week aren't here.
I'm here and Ted's here, but he's out of the picture, but he's listening.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, hi. Okay.
Hi, I'm Debbie, Julie.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. I see you now. It's hard to recognize people when you've been looking at them in a little cube. So
We're
forgive.
in a different room too, so maybe that.
Oh, me too. I'm in a different room. Other thoughts or questions, or this is a lot of new material and possibly not the best format. So we'll revisit the types as you grow your knowledge base. We'll get more flexible, but today's going to be important for you to ask some questions.
In comment to what Barbara just asked about, can you change your type or your label or whatever you want to call it? And I think last week Ted shared that he thought he was a 1, and then all of us said, no, you're a this. And so the kids all said, you're this, Mom, and so did Ted. And I didn't want to be that. So,
helpful.
you know, I mean, I there are parts of it that I think are right on. And then I think I mentioned to you that I took the 1 online test before you had sent out links, and I was not that number. So I think, as you said, when you see the things in that number that you are, that you don't like, that you don't think are helpful, it is helpful in the sense that you know the things that you need to work on.
Agreed. It also, you know, it for me, it's information about where I might be actually walking away from God instead of toward God, because your pattern. So let's use 1 since we're studying that today. For a 1, finding error, it feels good in kind of a bad way, right? Like a habit and a dysfunction is something that gives you a false comfort. And so knowing that your first response, an emotion might be anger, a thought might be, why didn't they fix this ahead of time? Or, you know, why don't people see this? That pause, that first thought wrong notion is like, wait a minute, okay, this is a chance for me to just breathe and just give a moment for maybe the pause that will feel hopefully more and more like the Spirit of God. You're not changing yourself. Change to me is like muscle up. Here's 10 steps to a new healthy habit. For me, the Enneagram is more about relaxing the pattern. And when we relax, God is already present. And so we move on with a different energy. But you're never, if you're a 1, you're never not going to have the inner critic, but it's not the voice of God, right? I think 1s can get all mixed up with what this voice is. And every type does that. So for me, I don't think God is leading me to be fearful all the time, right? That's not healthy. So, and it's, you know, it's hard to me that there's a week between each type, because you kind of, it's like, I feel like Netflix has affected our culture. It's like, oh, type 1. Okay, well, now I think I might be a 3. So I want to hear about that right now. And it's like, no, sorry, you have to wait 2 weeks. I mean, you certainly can read. Other questions or even thoughts from last week? I know some of you were here last week. Or wonderings about yourself. Does anyone think that they lead with type 1? Because that could help us a lot. Interesting. And ideally, if I knew your congregation better, and once you study the Enneagram, I often have a representative of that number in the class. You know, so you can ask them. So the way I'm training, and Debbie, one reason it's so important, the narrative tradition, is that you learn about your type by talking, right? By hearing it. So I'm not the best narrator for type 1, because trust me, I am not a perfectionist at all. I mean, I have an inner critic, but it's not.
I think originally Ted thought he was number 1. And I think he has a lot of number 1 qualities.
Sure.
But then when we went on to read more, let me just say who I thought you were.
12 hours yesterday.
He drove 12 hours yesterday. We did our first visit away from our home, and we went to visit my cousins in the Eastern Bank of Maryland, who have been very socially distanced. And so I led him on a wrong wild goose chase, and we had a longer trip home than we should have. So he's kind of worn out. But he actually, I think we all think he's a 5, more than a 1. He's definitely an investigator.
Well, if you go down the rabbit hole of reading, they're look-alike types.
Uh-huh.
And their reasons, I'm not going to confuse this class. I'm happy to talk to y'all, however, on the phone or whatever. It often helps. Part of my job and my training is to be a coach and to have hopefully face-to-face conversations with people and ask them leading questions where, you know, I don't know that I shared this last week. Do you know how long it took me to discern my type? It took me 2 years.
Wow.
So, I mean, don't feel remedial if you're just sitting here going, oh, you know, I think this is interesting. I don't know, Julie Smith. This is kind of, maybe I want to be in the Bible class. I don't know. I mean, I had to work with it. And finally, some of y'all might know Nancy Dunn. She's probably one of the renowned Enneagram teachers in Winston-Salem, and she's been hanging around it. She came to visit me when I was still working at Summit, and met in my office. And she said, asked me a few questions because people had me typed as the achiever, right? Because I had a pretty high leadership position, but that was causing me some stress because I'm not a 3, but I was acting like a 3, you know, to kind of answer your question, Barbara. She said, well, I bet like you were the person always volunteering to be in charge of everything. And I was like, She goes, well, then you're not a 3. She goes, you weren't like room mother? And I was like, no, that's like a day in hell for me. I don't like to actually like, you know, sharing like a fundraiser or a gala, like, no. And she was like, well, you certainly seem to be in charge of a lot here. And so there are books on leadership where you can learn what each number feels like to be in charge, right? So each type has a way of leading. That it's, we're not here to talk about leadership, but you see my point.
Julie.
Yeah, Lucy.
Hey.
Hey.
I thought it was really interesting when you're doing those, doing the narrative test, which I did, but watching the YouTubes, and there were all these really, like you said, all these different people who were the same type, and they described it completely differently, I thought, but you could see how it related. But I thought that was fascinating.
That it intrigues me. And that was also a little bit of why I didn't think I was a type 6. I mean, I lead with 6, which is the loyalist, because I didn't feel an affinity with a lot of other 6s. So it's very confused. But that's why this can really be your deepest inner spiritual work, because I don't want to say no one can help you, but Catherine sees me every day, and I think she would agree. She doesn't know what I'm thinking. I don't walk around at work saying I'm so scared. Right? You know, no one knows what's in your head, and healthy adults don't say everything that's in their head, right? I mean, children do, which is one reason I appreciate them most of the time so much. Anyone else have a thought or a comment from last week or?
This is Amy. John and I are just listening by only telephone here. I just don't know when I'm in a time of crisis, particularly with people I love or that I feel called to love, I can go into how do I fix this? What do I share that fixes this real fast? But I don't feel like I live there all the time. I think life's taught me I have to live one day at a time. It's taught me to use a gratitude list kind of on a running basis as I walk through the world. So I don't know, do people sometimes fall back to things when there's a crisis? Does that tell us anything?
Oh, yes. Can I pause and screen share the answer to your question? I mean, it's not.
Well, you can, but I won't be able to see it because we can't Zoom.
Well, I'm really good at talking. It's the only thing I'm really good at. So I will put it up and talk at the same time. And that way, hopefully everyone will be happy. Let's see. Let me get back to this. It's so awkward because I hate not seeing your faces, but I do think that there's something to be said. It doesn't want to. Let's see. It doesn't want to. There we go. I simply have a slide up that says vice, anger, judgment, but under that I have fear of being bad or defective. So one's really, and I think we all probably have some of that, but they are really worried and fearful that they are uniquely defective. Their virtue is serenity or perfection. Perfection is already unfolding. A lot of Enneagram teachers use the Julian of Norwich, all will be well, all manner of things shall be well. So the essence of getting back in touch with their, core of who God created ones to be is that idea that perfection is already there, and I am an instrument of help out of serenity, not out of anger. Let me skip that one. I'm gonna go to this one because y'all keep asking. I have a picture of the Enneagram map. I like to call it a map and not a chart, because a map, I talked about that last week, has lots of ways. So number one, let's just use one. The wings are 9 and 2 because that's where one falls on the circle. And we could spend, it's so complicated. I mean, this is like some whole mathematical, beautiful people, like engineers love it, but we're not going to go down that rabbit trail. One also, if you can see, and if not, I'll narrate it. One has a line across the circle that goes to 7. 7 is more happy-go-lucky, fun, the sort of almost the opposite of 1. So for a 1 to grow would be for them to let go and quit judging and just have a good time. Like, you know what? I'm not here to fix this party. I'm not here to tell them the air conditioner's not working and they're not socially distant and the food isn't gluten-free. And I'm just here to talk and have a good time, which the 7's already doing. So some of that, we'll talk a little bit about. You need a little opposite energy. I mean, I think it's still the Holy Spirit, but 1, you could see how they might need to loosen up and laugh and have fun. The other line goes to 4, and 4 is a melancholy, romantic, big feeling. And 1s can also just get overwhelmed with feeling, but they also, in an odd way, need to feel a little more. So I'm not exactly answering your question, but I'm showing you that the types move. So I think given what you said, you like to help, but you also have other ways of being. So what we really want to do with the Enneagram is learn to be a little more fluid. Does that make sense? Amy, do you want to ask another question?
Yeah.
I know you can't see it, but does that?
Yeah, that does make sense. I noticed that it seems to perhaps not help when I get anxious about needing to fix things in a crisis. Yeah.
Can you say more about what it feels like inside of you when you said it doesn't feel good? Can you give that a little more detail?
It feels like panic.
Okay.
I have a strong memory of being about, I'm not quite 5 years old, and my parents arguing. They did separate not long after this, and crying and trying to come between them because I thought I had been inspired that I was to make peace in the situation and stop the arguing and cause there to be, harmony. And my father looked down at me and put both his hands on my shoulders and said, "Honey, you can't fix this," and hugged me. And
wow.
Yeah. But I if I see discord or any problem, I've caught myself seeing, maybe between my son and his wife to be. I came in on something one time, and the feeling is just similar. It just is just like, and I realize that when I'm fearful, I need to step back and breathe and clue back into the presence of God and realize that I'm not him, and that I need to let him move and fix it. And I've learned to get quiet and and there's like kind of a safety and a serenity in that. What's the worst thing that can happen if I don't say anything right now kind of approach. And I just see this as something that can happen when I feel like things are coming unglued, I can start to respond in this way. And yeah.
Well, you said so many key things. That one you said that I'm going to pick up on is respond. I also want to say that your childhood memories matter, and we are not going to go down the nature and nurture. They're both real. They're both there. But you're going to find things in your childhood that reinforced your type, whether you were born with it on day one or in the womb. I have to comment. I don't know what your father was like, but in that moment, I think you heard the voice of God with him saying, I think sometimes a question, I don't know that it's coming from God, but it should certainly be coming from our heads, is this mine to do? Is this mine to do? And that we all want to fix things. I don't think it's, with the one in all of us, we all want the world to be better. I think all healthy people want to, look at situations and leave it better than you found it, just not as strongly as those that lead with type 1. But there's some things that just aren't ours to do. And there's no shame in that, because we can't do everything, because then we're sick and then we're really difficult. And the more stressed out you get, the more your type is on display. I can't believe how quickly time goes. Margaret last week was like, so you can end on time. And I was like, no, I can't. Actually, it's impossible. I want to, I think it will get easier each week. Oops. How did I do that? Hold on. Let me see if I can get back. That's so weird. What are y'all seeing?
The people at the top and then a big blank. Julie Smith has started screen sharing. About him.
Can y'all still see me now?
Yes.
Smaller picture of you. Yeah.
All right, let me try one more time. That wasn't what I wanted to share. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, there we go. I want to give you, I'm going to have to rethink. It's hard. I think it'll get easier to get through the types. I just wanted to touch way too quickly. And I think there's a way for me to get this information to you all, but practices for support for type 1. One is know your inner critic. Like, hi, inner critic. You're not going to try to kill your inner critic or judge your inner critic. You're just going to befriend it. It's there. We all have it. If you're a type 1, it's just a little stronger. And nothing is ever healed through anger. It's always healed through a softening embrace. And so just being familiar, befriend your inner critic, slow down and ask for help. And it's sort of a generic ask for help. I'm thinking specifically, you're on a church committee and it's not going well and you're going to just fix it all and you're going to run the whole thing yourself. Maybe not. What could be missing? None of us is representative of the wholeness of God. And I think for a 1, that desire to just be in charge, it could feel bossy, but they really just want to fix it. For a 1, this one's big. It doesn't sound big. And if you're not a 1, you're probably like, well, I recognize and process my anger all the time. Well, 1s do not. They stuff their anger and it's not okay. It's not perfect to be angry. So letting that anger come into the light is a really important healing practice. I put direct knowing of unfolding beyond ourselves, that I talked a little bit last week about the story of your life, and that the Bible is the story of God, and that the Moravian Church has a story of your faithfulness. But direct knowing of God is in control allows the 1 to not be. And that is a big thing. The other thing I've read more recently is discernment over judgment equals acceptance. I mean, I've kind of paraphrased it, but discernment, the Enneagram, and for the 1s, it's not recover so you're never having an opinion, but there's a big difference between judging. Judging has an edge, it's got action, it has a verdict, it has a consequence. Discernment has, to me, a different feel and a different texture, and that when you're discerning, I think that openness of your heart is more sort of the light of God instead of the light of your own opinion. And that's going to be something that, I mean, we could all, I mean, I could do every single one of these, but these are particularly recommended for type 1. But I want to show you, because I want to be sure you can leave the meeting. I mean, you're welcome to stay, but I want to end on time so that there's like a place for people. This has been in every one of my Enneagram trainings, the 5 things: awareness of your pattern, allow and accept. So in this case, the 1 is going to allow and accept that they have a strong inner critic. But I can already in my voice tell, no, I don't want to have an inner critic. Well, you have one. And it's just like an upset child is usually more calmed by an embrace than by a, you need to stop crying. Really? So, and appreciate your pattern, your whole self, how far you've come in life. Appreciate that you are a child of God. Appreciate even the parts of you that maybe you want to keep in the corner, and that those are there for a reason, and that, you know, nothing's necessarily bad, but appreciate even your efforts to look at yourself, your efforts to grow to God, and then create an action. You know, I think someone has told me to sort of either have a word you go to, or at different times I've carried like a little tiny thing in my pocket. I did a pilgrimage and they gave us a little cross, and for a while I carried that. But have something that you do, right? So it's kind of brain research. You know, we aren't our thoughts. And thoughts lead to action. So I think putting your body, it gets you out of your head and your thinking, and lets you act. And then adherence is making the practice of seeing yourself for who you are and appreciating it, and then just adhering to continuing to be faithful to this process. And I have found these sort of, the 5 A's to be very helpful. The last thing I didn't show this at the beginning because we weren't slide sharing, but here we have the perfectionist lodged between the helper and the peacemaker. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean anything to you yet, but it will. And that will help you if you wonder if you're a type 1. When you hear type 2, the helper, you're going to be like, I do some of that. Well, yeah, you do, because you're right next to it. And the peacemaker, you're going to be like, well, I do that. Well, of course you do. So, you know, that's going to give you more information if you're discerning your type. And then the last thing, I just wanted to end with another image of the Good Shepherd, and to take that with you this week. And that the Serenity Prayer, I think, is just a really good one for all of us. But for one, Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so for our 1 friends, you can't fix everything. It's not all yours to do. And I just get the image of the 1 sometimes feeling that way. And I think some recovery and some wholeness for them is going to be, you know, letting others carry some of that burden, which for some types, it's like, great, here, carry some of my burden, but not for the 1. So we're right at our time. You won't offend me if you leave, but I'm happy to stay. I think sometimes questions need to be answered at the right time. And so if you want to say goodbye, then we'll see you next week and you can just sign off. But if you have a question or a comment, I'm happy to stay and hear those. But thank y'all. Y'all are so curious. And even on Zoom, it's so fun. So I really wake up on Sunday mornings looking forward to this. And I don't have to get all dressed up and park and walk. And so there's advantages to Zoom.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Julie, I don't know if any of the, of course, I put this book up last week, and I know you had it on the list, and I don't know how the other books are laid out. But one of the things that I have found really helpful in this book is that for each number, give you a list of what it's like to be that number. Mm-hmm. And it kind of puts it in a nutshell, which is really, and then 10 paths to transforming yourself if you're that number, which is also helpful.
Susan Stabile's book that she's holding up, The Road Back to You, is a really penetrable first start. And so is this one. This one is a little, I guess, a little more esoteric. And one of the co-authors of this is a type 5, and 5s are very much head type. But this one, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, a lot of people consider this the Bible, and it simply predates Susan Stabile. There's a really, so Susan Stabile has a podcast, if y'all are into podcasts. And recently, she interviewed Russ Hudson, which is one of the co-authors of this. And it's a lovely conversation between Russ Hudson and Susan Stabile. It doesn't get down. Susan Stabile leads with type 2, the helper. And Russ Hudson leads with type 5, the observer and the researcher. And so the energy between the two of them on the podcast is amazing because they're so different. Those are very different types, and they're not next to each other on the circle. So I think Susan Stabile is easier to get in. And if you're really like loving this, The Wisdom of the Enneagram is a good one to have. And it has a lot on each type. And then another quick one is the one I was reading, the prayer, Chris Copeland's Heart of the Enneagram. It's this thin, and it's got like pictures, and it has kind of what you were saying, Debbie, of like, this is what words, and they're both kind of quicker reads. The Wisdom of the Enneagram is not like, I have 10 minutes, let me flip through it.
She's got a chapter that goes into much more detail, but at the front and the back of that, it sort of encapsulates what that number is about.
Well, and you may find that there's so many people teaching the Enneagram right now. I would just say I'm a little bit of a zealot to make sure that they're really trained and didn't actually just read a book and then pop up say, hey, I'm teaching the Enneagram, because the training is very complicated and there's more than one training. But Susan Stabile has been well trained and used it for a long time. And then, Russ Hudson was in at the beginning and has a whole institute in New York called the Enneagram Institute, where you can also get training. In happier times, you can go there and sit for like a month. So, it just depends on what level of Enneagram you want. Any other comments? Or I'll see if I can find Susan Stabile's podcast, because I do think she's entertaining to listen to and a warm. She has such a Texas drawl. It's charming. Anything else you're wondering before next week?
Thank you so much for all you're bringing to us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It is just so fun. And it's some of you that I know, it's interesting. There's only one person on this call that I've worked with enough that I might know her type. And Catherine. We've been doing a lot of this at Salem Montessori with our team of teachers, because it's never great in a workplace to say you did that again and it drives me crazy. That's not, but if say the person's a type 2 and they're going to help, and in Montessori, one of the goals is for children to be independent. That's a nice transition to say, could your 2 have interfered with the way you intervened with this child? Could you have stepped back? I know that's hard for you. At the panels, when it's the vice of the type, like, so for a type 2, I think Amy hung up, but she was saying she felt like she wasn't how hard it was not to help. For a type 2, if they don't help, they use the language, I'm going to die. And everyone else in the room that's not a type 2 with these trainings is like, no, you're not, or like I say, I was so afraid. And they're like, you don't need to be afraid of that. But when it's your type, you can't let it go. You can't get out of it easily. It's so deep. And that's really the way that I became because for me, if I were truly an achiever, the type 3, I would need to be achieve, lead, I don't need that. I'll do it, but I don't like crave accolades, right? Like, I don't have a room in my house of diplomas and trophies. I don't actually really care. I have some things I want to do, but it's not coming from, I need to achieve, right? My son in the military, he's a 3. So if he's winning, he's happy. If he's not winning, he's miserable. It's very simple. He was like that as a little boy. If the soccer team won, he didn't care. It was how he played. He'd come home and bang the wall and throw the ball around if he didn't play well. He's that really very linearly driven. So I think it's interesting to see type over time.
Lucy, you said you took the test. Were you surprised when you found your number?
Well, I keep changing my mind.
That's good.
But I took a multiple choice test. Mm-hmm. This was something I was going to ask them. My email box is full of, I don't even know if it's coming from you, Julie, or Margaret, or it's just coming from because I Googled something. And then I did the narrative test. And, I don't know. I mean, Julie said it took her years to figure it out, but
I mean, I'm no model. I'm not proud of it, but you might find it right away.
so I thought I had figured it out till I was listening to you today talk. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm that. Maybe I'm a 1. So I don't know, but it's been fun to read about it.
Well, and remember, you're going to resonate with pieces of each type. I mean, I can be very judgmental. I wouldn't say that's the first thing. And I think I was a little more judgmental when I was younger, but you get your edges rubbed off when you realize, well, it didn't actually need to be that way. It could be this way, or maybe it's none of these ways. So the next type we'll cover, not to shock you, but I'm going to go backwards and cover type 9, the Peacemaker. That's a pretty, there's some percentages somewhere. Type 9 is a pretty common type. So people are going to, and next week, what I'm going to narrate is that the numbers are in groups of 3, and 1, 9, the Peacekeeper, and 8, the Challenger. They're all body types. And so their knowing and the way they interpret the world often comes through their body. And so we're going to play with that. You're either a body type, a head type. Head types love information. They tend to stay in their head. They're very rational. And they need help getting to their heart and their body. 2, 3, and 4 are heart types. And so they're very feeling, and they're going to be more in touch with their emotions. And 5, 6, and 7 are head types. And so every single time I go to any type of counseling or any helping relationship, eventually the person says, I just want you to stop thinking. Please stop thinking, right? Because I'm going to go to solve, rational, what can we do? What needs to happen? So I'm not going to grow a lot if I just stay in my head. So 1s stay in their body. And you might find 1s, it can express itself through athletics. It can express itself through work, but they're going to be wired to feel things in their body and to hold things in their body. Releasing that is good for all of us, but the body types. My friend that's an 8 that's going through the training with me, she played soccer at Chapel Hill. So to me, that was like, wow, that's such a body type. I mean, that's, especially, she's a little younger than me, but a female soccer player is a very particular kind of energy, if that makes sense. And it doesn't rule your type, but it's so obvious to me that I'm a head type. I mean, I just live in my head. And one time my counselor said, can you just get out of your head? And I was like, no, I like it there. Not moving, not budging. And she was like, oh my God, what are we going to do with you? She goes, well, what do you feel? And I was like, I mean, I don't know. Does it matter? I don't feel on demand. Let me tell you what I did. She's like, no. So I'm going to kind of dive you into that piece next week. And that might also help you. The observer, I think, Debbie, you said your husband might be a type 5. They're the quintessential head type. They just want information. They want to know. They don't even necessarily need to share it all. It's the one type that's often, even at the training, they'll say vocation matters, but you could have a type 1 counselor or a type 8 counselor. But 5s are often researchers or librarians or possibly like an engineer, but something that is a lot of head information is going to be a really happy, comfortable place for a 5 that doesn't necessarily have a lot of interaction. It doesn't mean a 5 couldn't be a counselor, but they're when I've seen the panels, it's the type that's the most systematic.
The interesting thing is that all of my family think I'm a 2.
Okay.
And so Ted's a 5 and I'm a 2. So we're coming from, when I took the multiple test thing, I think I was a 6. So when you said about number 2s, they can't not be involved in other people's issues. I don't think I find myself there. I just don't. And that may be, as you said, as we age, we change kind of some of the ways in which we do things and the way we approach things.
What may be significant that the people you probably love the most and help the most see you as a helper, but that might just be what they see. And if they're not serious students of the Enneagram, if you're just kind of going around the wheel using the word, right, it might not be as clear what you were really thinking on the inside. But you've been in a helping role, I would assume.
Well, and the prideful part and all of that, and those are the things that I see that I work on, that reading that has made me say, yeah, I can get kind of like that. So, but I don't see myself as a pure 2. I just don't. So I'll be interested in seeing where I go.
Well,
Julie,
yeah.
Julie, this is Fran.
Hi, friend.
I guess Lucy made me think of something. I don't know. What about this test? Is that helpful, or where do we get it? And
So Margaret
out
sent
in the
out.
blue as far as what you're talking about when you talk. Yes.
So I can get Margaret to send it back out. Margaret sent a little list of resources for me last week. And there are 2 ways to take a test. One is answering some multiple choice questions. And the other one is reading a paragraph description of each type. I prefer reading the paragraph description, and then you kind of rank them. Like, this is the most like me, and you kind of rank them on down to this is nothing like me. I don't, like 1 for me is almost down at the bottom. Like, I don't need for it to be perfect ever. That's not. And it just helps you. Often what happens is people get stuck in their discernment between 2 or possibly 3 types. And that's helpful, right, to narrow down. And if you're entrenched in it like me, there's some classic types that confuse each other, right? So 9 and 2 actually look a lot alike. So the peacekeeper and the helper, that's one where people get really stuck and confused a lot. Sometimes 3, the achiever, and 1, the perfectionist, they will kind of, because they're both got a lot of forward moving energy and both want to do very, very active participants in the world. So if you can do that, I'll need your email. I'll try to get it from Margaret. She offered to let me put the group in an email, which I think could be helpful. And I'm learning every week. By the next time you see me, I'm going to know a lot more because I will have been through 30 hours of training. So, and I meet with somebody about every other week to work on this myself and try to, keep learning. So it's definitely an interesting journey. And, you're probably, there's certain types. 5 and 8 are pretty quick. Like, I'm a 5, or 8's the challenger. So they've got a lot of, like, not anger, but they're very firm and they're not afraid to tell you what they think. And those types often pick themselves out very quickly and they're right. But a lot of other types have a lot of look-alike, a lot of, and it has to do with many, many things. So not being sure of your type is pretty typical. And if you're too quick, you might be missing the point, right? And as we get into it, if you are functioning as a type that you have lines with, but it's not your type, what's going to happen? You're going to wear out. So for me, in the role I was in at Summit, I inhabited it in a way, but I can't live in 3, right? Like I couldn't be head of a huge organization. It would just wear me out, right? Because I'm not the achiever. It's not that you can't, but I just have a much more relational style. And so I learned that certain kinds of decisions really kind of do me in. Right? Like I have to have a lot of support and relationships. And I think leaders of really big organizations don't care. They just let the people go from the bank and that's the end of it. And they go find other jobs. That would, I wouldn't be able to do that. So you learn to inhabit your number in a healthy way. And I think hopefully you'll see that. So Fran, I'll try to get your email and that way you can kind of do some of the tests. And if a question pops to mind, I think my email address was also on the list. So you can feel free to email me or ask a question and I'll look forward to seeing y'all again.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
take
you,
care.
Julie.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks.
Well, it's good to see y'all. It's good to see you, Lucy, besides in the parking lot.
I know. Thank you so much for doing this.
The other thing, if you think you're a 1, I forgot to say this, but I've learned to pick out a 1, they dress very meticulously often.
Oh,
Like
Well,
4s
you
are
always look
artistic, but
stunning when
1s
you-
have a perfectionist way of dressing, and they're always very together. So I don't know if that 4s, you can tell they're the ones that like maybe dyed their hair. They're very expressive. They have to have a lot of their thing is I am unique. But a 1 often is a very well put together in a not so fashion forward. But anyway, if you pay a lot of attention to that and they really like order in their home.
Margaret, do you know your type?
Oh, I'm a 4. I like being,
Oh, hi, Margaret. You're still here.
well, I came back from, I hope that it worked. I wanted to apologize because our computer crashed and blah. So, and I'm not doing 2 computer things at the same time. So anyway. But-
We managed. It made me start a little differently, but I mean, it was fine.
Okay, well, and I hope it's recorded. And who is Sally too?
it said recording.
Yay.
Who is Sally too?
I think it's Sally McLeod.
I think so.
Oh, okay.
She might be gone because we
She's
left the
muted.
breakout room.
Okay.
Yeah, she's muted and
Okay. Okay.
Oh.
So that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure that that everybody got the handouts of yours that I sent.
I did. I just didn't get a chance to look at them.
Margaret,
Fran did not.
I did not either.
Fran?
I got them from Julie, though.
hey,
Oh,
that's
okay.
valid.
All right. Thank you, Sally. And Fran had not gotten them?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Fran might like hers mailed. She does struggle with her email.
Well, she might. I'll check with her, but also I've been sending things to her that she needs to access. But
If
I'll
she
make
does
sure.
it individually, if it gets sent to her individually, I think she'll have an easier time with it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's probably true. This whole group email thing is. Mhm.